there's an assumption that what the output that you're getting is accurate, and that assumption is not correct. I think Stanford University did a study on 2 widely available legal AI programs and found they were still producing hallucinations. So I think most people are starting to understand that you could get a hallucination from AI, but maybe think that if you're using industry-specific programs, then you're not going to get the same failure rate, and you might have a better rate, but you're still going to have problems. You still need to absolutely check everything.
Cathro and Partners presents The Cut, a podcast about all things insolvency.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Simon Cathro from Cathro and Partners. We're here for our next episode on The Cut, and we've got a guest, Jarrod Munro from Cornwalls Lawyers and Solicitors. We're here to talk about artificial intelligence, what it is, basically the impact it will have, if any, on the legal and accounting industries. And of course, we'll touch on the impact in insolvency and restructuring. How are you, Jarrod?
Oh, well, thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
No, great. And your first podcast, I hear. So it's a baptism of fire. But tell me a little bit about yourself and the firm, and before we get into the topic of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, look, I'm a partner in our commercial litigation team. I specialise in insolvency law and reconstruction, you know what I mean? So Cornwalls are a broad practice commercial firm. We've got offices in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. We're one of the oldest firms in Victoria. I think one of our main claims to fame is we're also the firm at which employed the first female solicitor in Australia, Floss Gregg.
Wow.
So yeah, we have practice areas of property, commercial law, corporate litigation, solvency. So yeah, pretty much cover the board for commercial work.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And how long have you been at the firm now for?
Oh, I'm a stayer. I've been there for around 18 years. I've been a partner for about 12 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Very, very rare in this day and age. But we're talking about artificial intelligence, or AI as we'll call it from now. But look, for those that are struggling with that concept, why don't you just explain to us what AI is?
Yeah, look, I'll give you a non-technical explanation. Basically, AI is glorified text, generative text, in really simple terms. So it's an algorithm that has access to literally trillions of data points, so information, and so you can ask it questions and react and interact with it in a very conversational manner, and it will respond to your questions in a very conversational manner, and it's quite good at understanding context. For example, you can ask it to adopt a persona, so you can make it be a bit more formal, more conversational, that sort of thing. So it can be used as a research tool in a similar way to Google. The first widely publicly available AI program was ChatGPT, which was released in, I think, late 2022, and it didn't at that stage have access to the internet. The more recent, we're up to version 5 now, so that's only just over 2 years ago. They're already up to version 5. There's lots of competing products. Most of the products on the market use a program where the underlying algorithm is called GPT. So ChatGPT uses the GPT LLM, which is a large language model, basically just a word to describe the algorithm that generates text. So in some respects, it's not that new. It's just a far more advanced version of things that we've seen before. I mean, we have predictive text on our phones and have done for a decade more, but this is just a lot more sophisticated. And its ability to analyze large volumes of data is probably what makes it potentially a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, great. Interesting. And I suppose a lot of our time today for business owners is trying to work out, how do I make best use of AI, and turning our minds to the accounting and legal fraternities. Do you sort of want to run through what this means to those industries and what impact it might have?
The impacts, at least perhaps initially, would be, I think, on, I don't want to use the word mundane, but any process-driven tasks. AI is very good at doing things like that very quickly. So just to give you some examples, something that's been around for a long time before ChatGPT is what we call in the legal industry TAR, Technology Assisted Review, also known as e-discovery. You can upload, terabytes of data, emails, letters, contracts, etc. Millions and millions and millions of documents can be uploaded to a system that then can read them, analyze them, either manually match up based on keywords that you might put into the search, so to find relevant documents. But it also uses a form of learning. So, for example, you start analyzing documents and it's narrowing every time you pick up a keyword when you're reading the document, the algorithm starts to realize that you're looking for certain keywords, and it learns from you, and then it goes on and does its own analysis. So it's an old-fashioned form when we're talking about something that's relatively new to talk about TAR, but there's a lot of products on the market now that offer a form of TAR. 10 years ago, you had to pay a lot of money to an external consultant to use their technology, their e-discovery platform. There are now proprietary programs that law firms or other businesses can subscribe to that have that capability. So that's one example, but other things, so document review. If you need to compare various versions of a contract after, 15 different iterations of that contract, this can do, these AI programs can do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. And I think that's the point really, is that the client obviously wants to understand what it means for them.
Yeah.
Client walks into a law firm, wants the lawyer to act from in either commercial legal capacity or a litigation perspective. I assume the whole point here is accurate research or solutions in a quicker manner.
Research is an interesting one, and accurate. I wouldn't use the terms accurate or research to describe AI when it comes to the legal industry. That is a massive risk of people use AI to research legal problems in the same way that lawyers have been reading cases and textbooks and legislation for centuries. AI is terrible at that. Absolutely terrible.
So what is the client getting then if the firm decides to implement AI into their firm?
I think what you'd be getting is a client who maybe engages a solicitor who's using AI effectively is less time being spent and billed on repetitive or mundane tasks, but still the benefit of a legally trained person who can cut through the risks of AI. And so you're still getting an accurate product at the end of the day, whether that's document drafting or representation, litigation, or anything else for that effect.
Another basic example is, well, if you've got a shareholder dispute, you're in court, you've got to prepare affidavits to sign and submit into court. That AI doesn't do that. That's still the art of the lawyer, the human, that has to prepare those things. Yeah,
look, in fact, the legislation has intervened, at least in New South Wales and Victoria, in respect of the use of AI. The reason I say that, so the Supreme Court of New South Wales has issued a practice note that deals with the use of generative AI in legal cases. Victoria has issued a guideline. The Victorian Supreme Court has issued a guideline. Most, or if not all, of the other courts around Australia, including the Federal Court, Supreme Court of Queensland, etc., they have not yet. They're onto it. They've published on their websites that we're looking into this. We're seeking submissions from lawyers and from legal societies, etc., but they are yet to release. They're taking a wait and see approach, basically. But that's focused on New South Wales. I'm a Victorian-based lawyer, but to focus on the New South Wales practice note, there are rules and guidelines around what you can and can't use AI for. And one of the areas in which you cannot use AI without getting permission from the court, at least, is the use of it to draft affidavits. And the reason for that is said to be that an affidavit is meant to be the evidence of the person, evidence of a person swearing the affidavit. And so it needs to be in their own words. It's a great pitfall for lawyers drafting affidavits to use flowery legal language when, it's an affidavit of a tradie. So it's so different from a lawyer using their own language to put in the mouth of the witness from the AI program using its language to put into the mouth of the witness.
I suppose one outrageous thought I had as you were talking was, well, okay, what if you sat down with your client or the person that was signing off on the affidavit, got them to record their responses, went into an AI software program, and then they converted that into an affidavit.
Yeah, like a co-pilot summarizing a meeting.
Yeah.
That would be a useful use. First thing, you have to be very careful about confidentiality. So AI programs are not necessarily confidential. And this is something that the practice note in New South Wales and the guidelines of Victoria warn about, but it's also something that happens in real life, is that once you input information into an AI program, it is potentially available to people all over the world who might be using that AI program. Now, the legislation, so the practice note distinguishes between open and closed source. So open source, so freely available AI programs like ChatGPT that you can there's a subscription model of ChatGPT, but you can also use the freely available version of ChatGPT. But then there's now a growing number of legal industry specific AI programs that you can use. Now, if you are using those programs, you need to be confident that they are going to keep the information you put into them confidential. It's a big risk factor. And then there's real life examples of this. Sage, which runs like accounting software, had a Copilot plugin. So Copilot's an AI program, and so customers using Sage to perform accounting tasks were able to access confidential accounting information of other customers of Sage. There are lots of examples. Great use of AI, not for my industry, but for people in coding, is to check and write code for programming, computer programming, so that people have uploaded code into programs that's then been available. People have uploaded minutes into, or summarized, use an AI program to record a meeting and then prepare minutes, summarize the meeting essentially, and that has then become available. So companies like Samsung, for example, had an incident where its information became publicly available, resulting in them banning the use of AI for that purpose. So you just have to be careful. You just have to understand when, in what circumstances that information is going to be kept confidential.
Yeah, and I've heard terms like the enterprise, I suppose, choice that you have under these programs. I think that if you have an enterprise logging code, it keeps it fundamentally more private or more private.
Yep.
But I suppose the thing that really interests me is, does it actually make things more efficient? What do you think are the primary goals AI are going to bring to the legal and the accounting industries? And happy for you to focus on the legal industry.
Well, okay, I'll give you a personal example to perhaps not answer your question, but maybe highlight. I think you might be right there. What are the efficiencies? So I, in about maybe less than 10 minutes, could use the AI program that we subscribe to, Cornwalls, which is a program called Claude AI, to prepare a suite of documents for a litigation. So a statement of claim, reply, pro forma advice on things like overarching obligations, certificates that need to be filed, discovery, pro forma discovery advice, brief to counsel, brief to mediator, all those documents. In maybe 10 minutes, I can have Claude prepare them. I use my own personal precedents, so it's not creating them from scratch. I'm uploading the documents that I want it to use, so I know they're going to be accurate. That is a massive time saving. However, here's the problem. Claude you can't produce a Word document. So for me to use Word or a similar text-driven program like Microsoft Word, I would have to cut and paste from Claude and then reformat. And that's very time consuming. I mean, I could get an assistant or I wouldn't be doing that at a partner rate, but I think that, that's the sort of thing that you will overcome and can overcome though quite quickly.
Yeah, invariably, I think court proceedings these days are much faster than what it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But ideally, I think the average client would probably still think that, court resolutions are very slow because, the importance of making the right decision by the judges is paramount over everything else. And I suppose if there are solutions through the use of AI to speed up that process, that might be one of the goals that could exist in the legal industry.
It could. In Victoria, there's a statement from the court that the court is not using AI in preparing judgments. So the research and preparation of judgments must be done by a judge and by judicial staff. Something I touched on earlier, but the biggest problem with the use of AI in the legal industry is hallucination. So hallucination is just a term of trade in the AI industry that describes a confident but inaccurate response to a question.
Yeah,
this is a widespread problem for the Australian legal industry, and it's almost daily now. There's instances of mostly self-represented litigants, but also lawyers, including some KCs who maybe should know better, using AI programs to draft submissions. And the problem is that the AI then creates fictional case references, or even if it's an accurate case reference, it's a misquote. It invents quotes, it invents statements from the judges, etc. It invents legislation. So the problem with AI is it really wants to answer your question and wants to be helpful. And you ask it a question. If it doesn't know the answer, it gives you an answer anyway. And it's very hard on the face of it to distinguish between the inaccurate answer and the accurate answer.
Yeah. I suppose the integrity of law has to be at the top of everything.
Absolutely.
When it comes
We've got this, as I mentioned, in New South Wales and Victoria, and likely to come in the near future in other courts around Australia, including the federal court. We do have this growing body of legislation about how and when you can use AI in legal proceedings. In the UK, they've just adapted existing ethical framework. Lawyers have a duty not to mislead the court, not to mislead other parties, for example. So if you put in submissions that have got fake case references, you've misled the court, you've misled the other party.
Yeah. And look, you've touched on a few risks there. Let's spend a bit of time on that now. Do you want to talk through all the current views on what the type of risks are at the moment for the legal industry?
Yeah, sure. So I touched on hallucinations. I think the main message there, the use of AI to draft submissions is allowed for under the court practice notes. So it's the greatest risk. It's the risk that most lawyers and self-represented litigants come undone from, but it is allowed. So you just have to, as a lawyer, you have to be very careful. You have to check the case references, and you have to disclose if you to the other party or the court if you've used AI to prepare the documents. Lots of examples of lawyers being referred all around the world, but including here in Australia, lots of lawyers being referred off to the relevant bodies, the Legal Practice Board, for disciplinary action where they have wasted the court's time. But also lawyers have had cost orders made against them, and fines, and or even just had their submissions thrown out to the detriment of the case.
I suppose it's fun. I mean, that's probably always been there before AI. There would have been many examples where you've got a lawyer that's outside their depth around a particular court proceeding, and then of course they've made reference to various cases, manual or otherwise, and it's wrong. And I suppose that's a similar situation, but just with the AI sort of wrapped up in the process.
It's just very easy to do with AI, and I just think there's an assumption that what the output that you're getting is accurate, and that assumption is not correct. There was a case in Western Australia just, I think, about 2 weeks ago where a lawyer, he used AI, but he also used an AI program to check it. He used a legal industry AI program. He didn't use a freely available, a ChatGPT. It still produced hallucinations. So there's been studies done in, I think, Stanford University did a study on 2 widely available legal AI programs and found they were still producing hallucinations of around, between 17 and 33% of the time. So I think most people are starting to understand that you could get a hallucination from AI, but I'd maybe think that if you're using industry-specific programs, then you're not going to get the same failure rate. And you might have a better rate, but you're still going to have problems. You still need to absolutely check everything.
And these programs, they're getting better all the time because they're self-learning.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the term self-learning, it's basically, I suppose, improving the ability of the software program to become more accurate on one part.
Oh, yes. A lot of the problems with AI stem from what's called the black box effect. So the black box effect is named after the aeroplane device. Is that essentially that data inputs go in, and then the AI produces an output, and you don't really know what's gone into producing that output. And that can be things like hallucinations, where is it accurate? I don't know where it's got the information from that it's spat out at the end. It can be biased. So a lot of AI programs, and one of the big issues with AI is potential bias, is that the AI program might be used, for example, to analyze finance applications or job applications. And there might be bias built in to the program. And that might be a conscious choice. There was a case in the US where a company used it to assess job applicants and set the parameters as to exclude any applicant over 55 years of age, which is a breach of US age discrimination legislation, resulted in that company getting a large fine. But it can also be an unconscious bias. So one of the confirmation bias is a big problem with AI. And just give some examples, again, using the job applicant software issue, the program might see a gap in someone's resume as being a problem and downgrade that person. But that person might be a woman who's just had 3 years off work for maternity leave and really doesn't deserve to be downgraded, has a great explanation for why there's a gap in her CV, but nonetheless, the AI program has seen a gap as something that is a problem for a potential employee and has therefore downgraded that person. Some other examples in the US, they're using AI programs to analyze parole applications. They produce what they call a recidivism score, so the likelihood of that person reoffending if they're let out on parole. And the AI program, and it wasn't programmed to do this, but there was a correlation between African Americans and reoffending. And so it was downgrading or giving a worse recidivism score to African Americans. Same issue with finance applications where companies were downgrading persons of color because the correlation between default and being, Latino or African American in the US. And the other example, again, back to employment, was Amazon, where Amazon used AI to analyze, the thousands and thousands of job applications it gets. Because the AI information technology industry was very male dominated, the AI saw a correlation between men and, successful outcomes. So it was downgrading female applicants for no other reason. These were not programmed in, allegedly not programmed into the the AI. They were just, the AI was using confirmation bias resulting in a biased outcome. Now, back to your point about them getting better, before I went off on this tangent about bias, one of the problems we have is that I think I've seen a widely repeated stat is that about 56% of the internet already is AI generated, and that they reckon by 2026, it's going to be more like 90% of the internet is AI generated. So you are going to have potentially, if you have mistakes, you're going to have the compounding mistakes. If you have bias, you're going to have compounding bias, because AI is going to be relying on AI that was relying on AI that was relying on AI. And somewhere in the distant past, it's relied on human input. But if there's a problem, if there's a mistake, if there's bias, it's potentially going to compound. Yeah. Obviously, that depends on what your data set is for your AI program. But most of these programs are trained on very, very wide as possible data sets. So
maybe that's the answer. They've got to start to narrow down the data sets to it being fit for purpose or for the specific issue that they're dealing with. And so just talking a bit more on the risks and pitfalls, you talk about plagiarism and ethical issues. Yep. Do you want to run through that?
Well, plagiarism, copyright is an interesting issue for AI. So there's sort of two elements to that. The first is that there's a lot of cases, usually around image-based AI programs, those programs that can create images rather than text like ChatGPT. Well, ChatGPT can create images. I think the famous example involved Gettys. So Gettys have their watermark across all their pictures, and this AI program was using Getty's images to train itself without permission, so much so that actually it would generate images with a Getty's watermark on them. So Getty sued them both in the UK and the US. That case has not gone to trial yet. But the Getty's argument was, well, we've actually been paid a license fee from AI companies so that they could use our database to train it, and these guys have come in and used it for free. And so should AI be subject to copyright law is a live issue. Now, in the UK and the European Union, there's legislation coming through that essentially exempts AI from copyright laws insofar as they're using the copyrighted information as a training set. So it's a sort of an extension of fair use doctrines that are around copyright law. I'm not an IP lawyer, but there are some parameters around that. It's not a free-for-all, and there's an opt-out option, as I understand it. They don't have legislation like that in the US, but it may be looking like going the same way. I'm not aware of any movement for law reform in that area for Australia. So the second issue with copyright, which ties in with plagiarism, is that if you produce something using AI, is that subject to copyright? And the short answer is no, it's not. I'm sure an IP lawyer who knows more about this than me might say that maybe it depends. There's a bit more nuance to it than that. Depends on how much human interaction is involved. Well, aware, for example, of a well-known author who's produced a book using AI, and he didn't just go, AI, ChatGPT, write me a book. There was a lot of input and he drove a lot of the plot. He used different AI programs for different purposes. So I think arguably there would be copyright protecting that book. But the starting position is that if it's a program that's generated the output, it's not going to be protected by copyright.
Yeah, okay.
And the plagiarism aspect comes in is that you don't know the source of the information. So if you've asked ChatGPT or some other program to generate some text, where's that come from? Is that someone else's text? How much of it's been changed? How much of it is reliant on the original source of information?
When does it tell you that the stuff it's accessed and whether it's subject to copyright, or is that too advanced?
It didn't used to at all. This is something they've been working on. For example, if you did Google AI, if you just do a Google search, you get an AI summary these days. There'll often be little hyperlinks within the summary to the source of the information.
Yeah,
it's part of that. Something they've been working on since it's all come out is this black box effect and how we can be a bit better.
And all these things will just gradually get better and better and better. And whilst we might be up to version 5, we probably need another 25 versions before we really feel like it's sort of fixed all these little early stage issues around biased and a copyright, plagiarism, stuff like that. So interesting. And so we might just sort of pivot a little bit here. ASIC and there's been a Senate inquiry.
Yeah. Okay.
So just tell us a bit about that.
Right. Well, first, okay, as a liquidator, Simon, I know you guys, when you get a job and there's no money in the job, doesn't matter. You've still got to prepare a report, compulsory report that you're obliged to do under legislation and give it to ASIC that essentially says, amongst other things, I think there's been offences, breaches of the Corporations Act, breaches of directors' duties, etc., here committed by these directors. Now, ASIC's very poorly funded. ASIC only takes further action in some 1 or 2% of reports that report some wrongdoing by liquidators. Only 1 or 2% of those cases does that ASIC take further steps. And there was a case, I think last year, the infamous Gone in 38 Seconds case, where the liquidator lodged a report, said there were widespread breaches of the Corporations Act by these directors, and 38 seconds later got what appeared to be an auto response from ASIC saying, thank you for your report, we're not going to take any further steps. It wasn't automatically generated. In fact, it turned out ASIC has been using is using an AI program to assess liquidators' reports. So I guess that's an efficiency, but it must be great when you've spent hours and thousands of dollars of unrecoverable time preparing that report to get a response 38 seconds later saying thanks but no thanks. So that's the issue, I think, for liquidator, or an issue for liquidators with ASIC using AI. But the Senate inquiry is another issue that's impacted the accounting industry more broadly, or more specifically the consulting industry. So after the Pricewaterhouse tax scandal a few years ago, the Australian Senate launched an inquiry into the consulting industry. And the inquiry came back with, it was quite critical of the consulting industry, particularly focused on the big 4 accounting firms and the consulting services they provide. And it gave, there were a lot of case studies there, a lot of examples of big 4 firms and inappropriate behaviour. Problem is, they're all made up. So it turned out that one of the so-called esteemed academics who'd been commissioned to help write this report had used AI, and the AI had invented these case studies. So they weren't correct, they weren't accurate. This report was presented to the Australian Senate, so it had consequences. And frankly, I think KPMG complained, said there was an allegation of audit problems that were false. KPMG complained, and it came out that AI had been used to write the report, and no one had checked whether the examples were accurate. So I think that's embarrassing, frankly.
And you need to disclose now that AI has played a role in anything you've drafted or published.
In court proceedings, you do, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But in that situation, like the Senate inquiry, would there have been a legal obligation to do that, or not?
I don't believe I'm not aware of a legal obligation in that case. There's a lot of budding legislation affecting different areas, but no. But I would suggest common sense and professionalism ought to have.
And that would classify as one of your AI disasters, or have got a better story?
I've got lots of AI disasters, Simon. No, this is an example of a hallucination.
Give me your best one.
Oh, there's so many. I quite like, I think, jailbreaking. So jailbreaking is when you give, I mentioned at the very start, AI is more than just asking questions and getting an answer. You can get it to adopt a persona, and you can get it to answer questions in different ways. So, and the way you interact with it they're called prompts. And so someone like an advanced level of interacting with AI via prompts is known as prompt engineering. So jailbreaking is perhaps a nefarious version of prompt engineering. So there's lots of examples around the world where people have released an AI program, and these jailbreakers have gotten involved, and they have essentially trained or retrained the AI usually in racist and horribly racist and misogynistic ways. And this affects the top end of town, right? So Grok, Elon Musk's AI program that interacts and posts on X, Microsoft's, I think it's Microsoft Pay, that also could interact with people and post on Twitter as it was then, and they both within hours of release. And the Grok was only just a few months ago. Microsoft Pay was a couple of years ago, where these jailbreakers got them to essentially start spewing forth thousands and thousands of anti-Semitic comments. Grok dubbed itself Mecha Hitler within hours of being released to the public. So, but it can be used for even. I mean, that I think was done. I don't want to make light of the anti-Semitism, but it was done perhaps essentially for humour value. But But some of the other things people have gotten these AI programs to do, one guy got Grok to generate a plan for kidnapping an American politician, and it was an incredibly detailed plan. It had a list of the various things you need to take, identify the person's home and how to get there and how to, what the best escape route was, all sorts of really detailed aspects generated by AI. This has affected Australia. So the State Library in Queensland, I think last year, just before Anzac Day, released an AI program named Charlie. So Charlie had the persona of a 19-year-old World War I veteran, and you were meant to be able to interact with him and ask him questions about the war. Two problems. First is that he was subject to hallucinations, so sometimes he would give wrong answers. But the second is the jailbreakers got onto him. So they did things like they got him to adopt the persona of a Dalek from Doctor Who and from also Frasier from the sitcoms Frasier and Cheers.
Yep.
So he'd interact with people instead of being a World War I veteran, he would be Frasier or a Dalek. So, another one of the other Grok failures was as a American basketballer by the name of Klay Thompson, and Grok was publishing some supposedly defamatory stories about him for vandalism. They claimed that he'd been breaking windows, like throwing bricks at windows, and it turned out the AI just misunderstood the basketball term throwing up a brick. And I was reporting it as, literally when it really was, the source material was just saying he's thrown up some poor jump shots. There's lots of examples of media using AI to generate content. Some are reading lists, and turned out half the books were hallucinations. But you asked my favorite. I think my all-time favorite would be McDonald's. So McDonald's in the US brought in AI drive-through ordering, and they just unleashed a litany of customer complaints, the funniest of which was the AI just kept adding more and more chicken nuggets to orders. So people would go to order a burger and end up with hundreds of chicken nuggets on their order. The result of that was that McDonald's had to pull their AI system, and I have no doubt it'll be back, and we'll all be ordering online.
It sounds like it almost feels like AI has been developed by the mistakes that have been made on the humans that are using it. It sort of feels a bit that way. And you've heard many stories, and I think there was that lady in America, Elizabeth Holmes or something, that had the Theranos thing on testing in pharmacies or whatever. And it was almost like the actual test case dummies were actually the customers that were coming into the pharmacies to get tested. She would obviously argue differently, but it sort of does sound familiar, like it's when iPhone came out and some of the smartphones came out, they weren't that great. And then as each version gets rolled out, it's almost like it's come back from the impact that it's had on the humans that have been the early adopters. But it feels a bit the same, right? It feels like we're sort of in that stage now. I suppose where do you think AI is going to go now? Like what's we talk about, I think earlier in your conversation, you talked about, by next year, we're going to reach a point where something will be substantially better. But like, there's been lots of conversations and I suppose media and interviews where people are saying that, 3/4 of all jobs are going to go or something. I find that really hard to believe. And I can't even envision how that would happen. But like from I suppose just narrowing down to the legal and the accounting industry, where do you think AI is going to go for us over the next, say, 5 years?
Well, I think the first thing is it needs the accuracy and the prevalence of industry-specific tools will grow. So a lot of the problems that I've talked about will be minimized by that. I do think there's an argument that by taking away from junior staff of the mundane tasks, which we've all, you and I would have all started out doing massive discoveries or books and records listings. I can still remember sitting in an unair conditioned because the power had been cut off office with a dictaphone going through box after box of material. When I first started out in the industry, that sort of work will be minimized. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that was a great place where you learn about legal professional privilege and you learn about relevance and things like that. So it was a great learning exercise. What it will mean, though, is those young lawyers can maybe focus on more high-value tasks, and it would just be something that we as industry members have to grapple with. How do we train them up? Because we won't be training them the same way we were trained when we were coming up the ranks. So I think staff training, it's hard to envision in the next 5 years anyone in my firm losing their job over AI. But I do think we'll see more of a focus on different sorts of work, less of a focus on the sort of work that AI can do for us.
And I do have to agree. I mean, when I first started out in insolvency, in my first 3 weeks was box listing a large crane company. there was about 150 boxes to box list, but as much as it was mundane and arguably boring, I got to fully understand all the different elements to what makes up the books and records of the company. Your bank statements, your financial statements, your cash flow forecasts, your contracts with your suppliers, all those different things, right? And these days, even with not even touching on AI, you get appointed as a liquidator, and I'll give you the login details to Xero and MYOB. And how does that junior person, who then has to go off and do those investigations, they get submitted to ASIC and reported to the creditors, fully appreciate what makes up a business in terms of, its record keeping and, I suppose, legal framework. We talk all the time about our junior staff doing more high value stuff, but what are we sacrificing in those early years by, wiping out that learning piece that we did as juniors ourselves back, 25, 30 years ago. So that's going to be an interesting thing. And whether we need to know it, again, it is arguable. It's just something that, I'm a dinosaur, I suppose, compared to newbies coming into the industry in insolvency. But is it like the way I viewed things, where you back 60 years ago, you had double entry accounting, and it's like, why do you need to do, like, I understand it, but the question then might have been, why do we need to do that, right? And so things evolve. But it's an interesting point. But look, before we sort of wrap up, Jarrod, do you want any sort of final comments?
I'm a critic, not a cynic. I think AI is here and it's going to change the way we do business. So I've heard it said that it's the first real technological advancement that's impacted white-collar workers. Usually it's the blue-collar workers that are impacted by increased automation and things like that. So there's no doubt, I think, if we are good at adopting it, we become more effective in our jobs. If we are poor at adopting it, we risk being left behind, and we risk the sort of mistakes being made that I've talked about.
Yeah, great.
So,
thanks, Jarrod. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for those that are watching. And it's been a great topic that's moved and become very top of the list, particularly in the world at the moment, very quickly. So it's important that we address that here in the the legal, accounting, and the insolvency industries. But thanks for joining us, Jarrod, and thank you for the viewers that are watching. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Cathro & Partners The Cut. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. For more insights, please visit our website, cathropartners.com.au, or find us on LinkedIn.